In a small southern town where secrets linger like whispers in the humid air, Marcus Bennett, a black mailman with a quiet strength, makes a delivery that changes everything. The package wasn't supposed to be more than another stop on his route. But when an encounter with the sharp-tongued and prejudiced Evelyn Harper ends in humiliation, Marcus stumbles upon a hidden truth, a letter from Evelyn's late husband, James, confessing to a life-altering secret. James had a child, a biracial daughter, living in the same town, unaware of her lineage. Torn between exposing the truth and keeping the peace, Marcus embarks on a journey that pits him against Evelyn's wrath and a town entrenched in systemic prejudice. As he digs deeper, Marcus finds himself entangled in a web of lies, danger, and a shocking connection to the child at the heart of the mystery. The hum of the sorting machine filled the early morning quiet of the Cloverfield post office. Marcus Bennett, clad in his worn uniform and trusty cap, stood by his mail cart, thumbing through letters with practiced efficiency. His colleagues exchanged small talk around him, but Marcus kept his focus on the work. "Hey, Bennett," called Carl, a burly co-worker sipping coffee by the breakroom door. "Another day of playing Santa Claus, huh?" Marcus chuckled, his deep voice steady. "That's the job, Carl. People need their letters." Carl leaned in. "Watch yourself in Harper Heights today. Heard Evelyn's been on another rampage." Marcus nodded, unbothered. Nothing new there. He stepped outside into the humid morning, the air heavy with the scent of dew and wildflowers. The town of Cloverfield stirred awake as Marcus began his route, waving to neighbors and dodging the occasional stray dog. The routine felt comforting until he reached the Harper estate. The Harper estate loomed ahead, its manicured gardens a stark contrast to the town's modest homes. Marcus parked his truck and approached the wrought iron gate, carrying a package addressed to Evelyn Harper. Evelyn appeared at the door, her sharp features framed by her silver hair. She stared at Marcus with a cold, calculating gaze. "What do you want?" she barked, stepping onto the porch. "Morning, Mrs. Harper. I've got a package for you." She eyed the box suspiciously. "Is that so? And how do I know you haven't tampered with it?" Marcus's brows furrowed. "Tampered with it? Ma'am, I'm just here to deliver your mail." Evelyn scoffed. "Your kind isn't exactly known for honesty, are you?" Marcus paused, the word stinging but not unfamiliar. "I'm just doing my job," he said evenly, extending the package. Evelyn didn't take it. Instead, she slammed the door, leaving Marcus standing there. He placed the package on the porch, exhaled deeply, and returned to his truck. Back at the post office, Marcus leaned against his truck, staring at his route sheet. His eyes kept drifting to the Harper package. Something about it felt off. The address read, Evelyn Harper, care of James Harper. "That can't be right," Marcus murmured. James Harper had been dead for 5 years. Curiosity gnawed at him. Breaking protocol, he opened the package carefully in the sorting room. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. It bore James Harper's handwriting, "To Evelyn, please forgive me." Marcus hesitated but opened the letter. Its contents left him breathless. "I have a child. She deserves to know the truth. Please make this right." The words swirled in Marcus's mind, the weight of the secret pressing on him. At home that evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the letter spread out before him. His small, modest house felt quieter than usual, the ticking clock louder than his own thoughts. His father's voice echoed in his memory, "Son, always do what's right, even when it's hard." Marcus folded the letter, slipping it into his pocket. He couldn't shake the feeling that this truth wasn't his to keep. But what could he do? Hand it back to Evelyn, who had no intention of facing it. The thought of the child James mentioned lingered. Somewhere in this town, a young woman lived unaware of her heritage. Didn't she deserve to know? The next morning, Marcus returned to the Harper estate, parking a block away to avoid suspicion. He watched Evelyn from a distance as she pruned her roses, her movements brisk and deliberate. Instead of approaching her, Marcus drove to the town's library. In the archives, he sifted through public records and old newspapers, searching for clues about James Harper's life. One name stood out, Claire Ellis. She had worked for the Harpers as a housekeeper around the time James would have written the letter. As Marcus left the library, he clutched the clue tightly. The journey ahead wasn't clear, but it had begun. Marcus arrived at the edge of town, where the modest houses gave way to the woods. Claire Ellis's home, a small, weathered bungalow, stood at the end of a dirt road. Marcus hesitated before knocking, unsure of how to approach the delicate subject. The door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and short, salt-and-pepper curls. She looked him up and down, suspicious. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice guarded. "Ms. Ellis?" "My name's Marcus Bennett. I'm the town's mailman." He paused, pulling the letter from his pocket. "I came across something connected to James Harper. I believe it's important." Claire's expression hardened. "I don't want any trouble. Whatever you've got, take it somewhere else." "Please, hear me out," Marcus said, stepping back to ease her tension. "I found this letter. It's about a child. Your child." Claire's breath hitched, her grip on the door tightening. "What do you know about my daughter?" "I'm trying to figure that out myself," Marcus admitted. "I think you deserve to know what James wanted to tell you." She hesitated before stepping aside. "You've got 5 minutes." Inside, the house was modest but clean, filled with the scent of lavender. Claire gestured for Marcus to sit at the kitchen table, where a stack of bills lay unopened. "Show me the letter," she said, crossing her arms. Marcus slid the folded paper across the table. Claire read it slowly, her expression shifting from anger to sorrow. When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened. "I always knew James was a coward," she said bitterly. "He promised he'd tell her, but he never did. Died without saying a word." "Her?" Marcus asked. "My daughter, Amara," Claire replied. "She's 17 now. Smart as a whip. Doesn't know a thing about him, though." "Why didn't you tell her?" Marcus's voice was gentle, but the question hung heavy. "Because this town doesn't forget, Mr. Bennett. Being a single mother was hard enough without dragging his name into it." Claire leaned forward. "And you, why are you getting involved?" Marcus hesitated, then said, "Because I've seen what silence does. My father was taken from me because no one wanted to speak up. I don't want to let another truth stay buried." Claire stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, then. You want to help? Start by protecting her. Amara doesn't need this blowing up her life." Marcus left Claire's house with a heavy heart, but his resolve was firm. As he drove back toward town, his mind churned with the weight of the responsibility he'd taken on. When he reached his usual route, something felt off. The Harper estate loomed in the distance, and parked outside was a sleek black car he didn't recognize. Evelyn Harper stood on her porch, speaking to a man in a sharp suit. Marcus watched from his truck as the man handed her an envelope and glanced in his direction. Evelyn's gaze followed, her eyes narrowing. Marcus started the truck and drove on, pretending not to notice. His heart raced. "She knows I'm digging," he thought. Curiosity tugged at Marcus. That afternoon, he stopped by Cloverfield High School, parking across the street. Students trickled out of the building, laughing and chatting as they made their way home. Then he saw her. Amara Ellis was easy to spot, her curly black hair bouncing as she walked, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She paused to help a younger student pick up fallen books, flashing a bright smile that lit up her face. Marcus couldn't help but smile, but the moment was bittersweet. This girl had no idea who her father was, or the storm that could follow if the truth came out. A voice startled him. "You looking for someone?" Marcus turned to see a teacher standing nearby, eyeing him warily. "No, just passing through," Marcus said quickly, tipping his hat before heading back to his truck. As he drove away, he resolved to protect Amara, just as Claire had asked. That evening, Marcus sat in his living room, the letter once again spread out on the coffee table. His thoughts swirled, a storm of doubt and determination. A knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. When he opened it, Claire stood on the porch, her arms crossed tightly against the cool night air. "I thought about what you said," she began. "And I can't keep this secret forever. Amara deserves to know the truth." Marcus stepped aside, letting her in. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded. "I don't know how she'll take it, but she needs to hear it from me. Not from Evelyn. Not from anyone else." "Then I'll help," Marcus said firmly. "But Evelyn's watching. She knows I'm involved." "Let her watch," Claire said, her voice steelier than before. "This is about my daughter, not her pride." The chapter ends with Marcus and Claire making a pact to reveal the truth to Amara, knowing it could change everything. The faint hum of a lawnmower buzzed in the background as Marcus parked his truck a block away from the Ellis house. His palms felt slick as he clutched the folded letter in his hand. He had spent days agonizing over this moment, rehearsing the words in his mind. Claire greeted him at the door, her face pale but resolute. "She's in the backyard," she said softly, stepping aside to let Marcus in. "I told her you'd be stopping by. She doesn't know why yet." Marcus nodded, his throat dry. He followed Claire through the modest home to the back porch, where Amara sat cross-legged on a weathered bench, sketchbook in hand. The sun cast a warm glow over her curly hair, and her pencil moved fluidly across the page. "Amara," Claire called, her voice trembling slightly. Amara looked up, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Hey, Mom." Her gaze shifted to Marcus, and a small smile appeared. "You're the mailman, right?" Marcus nodded, stepping closer. "That's me. Marcus Bennett." "What's this about?" she asked, closing her sketchbook. Claire glanced at Marcus, who took a steadying breath. "Amara, what we're about to tell you might be hard to hear," Marcus began, his voice low and steady. "But it's something you deserve to know." Amara's brow furrowed as she straightened in her seat. "What is it?" Claire sat beside her, taking her daughter's hand. "It's about your father." "My father?" Amara's voice was sharp, her confusion palpable. "What about him? I thought you didn't know anything about him." Claire hesitated, her grip tightening on Amara's hand. "I've always known who he was. But I kept it from you because I thought it was better that way." Amara pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "Better? You lied to me my whole life about my dad, and now you're telling me it was for my own good? I didn't want you to get hurt," Claire said, her voice cracking. "Your father, James Harper, he was a complicated man. He couldn't be in your life, and I thought it was better to shield you from the pain of knowing." Amara's face went pale, and she took a step back. "James Harper? The Harper family? As in Evelyn Harper?" Her voice rose with each word. "This can't be real." "It's true," Marcus interjected gently. "I found a letter he wrote before he passed. He wanted you to know the truth, even if he couldn't tell you himself." Amara's eyes welled up, but she quickly blinked the tears away. "Why now? Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know," Marcus said, his voice firm. "And because the people who've kept this from you don't have the right to keep it hidden any longer." Amara's lips trembled as she stared at her mother. "I need time," she said abruptly, turning on her heel and walking toward the woods that bordered their backyard. Marcus and Claire exchanged a pained glance but let her go, knowing she needed space. Evelyn Harper was waiting for Marcus the next morning. She stood at the edge of her pristine lawn, arms crossed over her chest, her sharp gaze boring into him as he approached with his mail cart. "I know what you're doing," she hissed as Marcus reached her driveway. "And I'm telling you right now, you'd better stop." Marcus met her glare with quiet defiance. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mrs. Harper. I'm just delivering the mail." "Don't play coy with me," she snapped, stepping closer. "You've been snooping, talking to people you have no business talking to." I won't have you dragging my family's name through the mud. Your late husband wrote a letter, Marcus said calmly. He had something important to say, and I'm making sure it's heard. Evelyn's face twisted in fury. That letter was meant for me, not you. You had no right to read it, let alone meddle in my affairs. Your affairs involve a young woman who has a right to know where she came from, Marcus replied evenly. Evelyn's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. If you don't drop this, I'll make sure you regret it. I've lived in this town my whole life. I know how to make someone like you disappear. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he refused to rise to her bait. Do what you have to do, Mrs. Harper. But I'm not backing down. Evelyn's eyes burned with hatred as Marcus walked away, her threats lingering in the humid air. Amara sat on the bank of the creek that ran through the woods, her knees drawn to her chest. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows over the rushing water. Her sketchbook lay forgotten beside her. She thought about her mother's words and Marcus's calm demeanor. James Harper. The name was familiar, almost mythical in Cloverfield, a wealthy, powerful man whose family's influence loomed large over the town. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She was his daughter. The Harper's blood ran through her veins. How do I even begin to process this? She murmured to herself, brushing away tears. She thought of her mother, the sacrifices she must have made to raise her alone. And she thought of Evelyn Harper, who had likely known about her existence all along. Her fists clenched. They've controlled this town for too long. The next day, Marcus returned to the post office, feeling the weight of the previous confrontation. Carl greeted him with a clap on the back. You all right, Bennett? You look like you've been through the ringer. Marcus managed a small smile. It's been a long week, Carl. As he sorted through the morning's mail, a co-worker approached, her expression earnest. Marcus, I heard about what you're doing, about the Harpers. Just wanted to say I think it's brave. Marcus looked up, surprised. You know? Word travels fast in this town, she said with a shrug. Not everyone's on Evelyn's side. Some of us are tired of her acting like she owns this place. Marcus nodded, a flicker of hope lighting within him. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Evelyn Harper wasn't done. That evening, Marcus found her waiting outside his home, her posture rigid and her expression cold. You're making a mistake, she said as he stepped out of his truck. This doesn't end well for you. I'm not afraid of you, Mrs. Harper, Marcus replied, meeting her gaze. Her lips curled into a cold smile. You should be. You're messing with things you don't understand. This town doesn't need a hero, Mr. Bennett. It needs people who know their place. Marcus felt his anger rise, but kept his voice steady. The truth has a way of coming out, no matter how much you try to bury it. Evelyn's smile faltered, replaced by a glint of desperation. Consider this your last warning. Walk away, or I'll ruin you. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You've already ruined enough lives, Mrs. Harper. I won't let you ruin hers. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. She turned sharply and stalked back to her car, her heels clicking against the pavement. As Marcus watched her drive away, he felt a surge of resolve. He wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. The library smelled of aged paper and faint cleaning products as Marcus flipped through yellowed newspaper archives. He was seated in the quietest corner, stacks of records beside him. The town's history played out before his eyes, celebrations, scandals, tragedies. But he wasn't searching for general history. He was looking for James Harper's secrets. After an hour of sifting through articles, he found what he was looking for, a piece about Claire Ellis, listed as the long-serving housekeeper for the Harper family. Her name was mentioned only briefly in an article about the Harpers hosting a charity gala. Next to the snippet was a blurry photograph of James, Evelyn, and Claire in the background, barely noticeable but unmistakably present. Marcus leaned back, his mind racing. Claire had said James provided support for Amara, but there had to be more. Where were the records of this financial support? He jotted down dates and locations, his determination renewed. Just as he was about to leave, an idea struck him. He flipped back through the records until he found it, a will James Harper had filed shortly before his death. The document mentioned Evelyn prominently but had a peculiar omission. There was no mention of any additional heirs. Marcus's jaw tightened. If James had intended to recognize Amara, this omission spoke volumes about Evelyn's role in keeping the secret buried. He snapped a photo of the relevant pages and left the library, clutching his findings. Evelyn's estate looked as imposing as ever when Marcus parked a few blocks away. He walked to the gate, not intending to confront Evelyn outright, but instead to observe. A sleek black car pulled into the driveway just as he reached his vantage point. A man in a tailored suit emerged from the vehicle, carrying a leather briefcase. Marcus recognized him. It was the same man he'd seen speaking with Evelyn before. Curious, Marcus moved closer, crouching behind a hedge to remain unseen. "Evelyn," the man began, his voice sharp and professional, "you need to reconsider your strategy. If this letter gets out, it'll raise questions about the legitimacy of the estate." "I don't care about the estate," Evelyn hissed. "I care about keeping my husband's name untarnished. Do whatever it takes to stop him." Marcus felt a chill. They were clearly talking about him. He stayed hidden as the man nodded curtly and walked back to his car. Evelyn watched him go, her posture tense, then turned toward the house, muttering under her breath. As she disappeared inside, Marcus slipped away, his mind buzzing. Evelyn wasn't just trying to protect herself, she was willing to destroy anyone who got in her way. The next morning, Marcus's usual delivery route felt different. As he stopped at the diner to drop off their mail, two women whispered loudly, glancing his way. "He's the one poking into the Harper family business," one said, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Doesn't know when to leave well enough alone," the other muttered. Marcus tried to ignore them, but their words cut deep. As he stepped back onto the sidewalk, he bumped into an older man he recognized from the post office. "Don't let him get to you," the man said gruffly, adjusting his cap. "Some folks around here don't like having their dirt dug up." "Thanks, Mr. Lewis," Marcus said, grateful for the support. "Not everyone's against you," Mr. Lewis added. "Plenty of us respect what you're doing. About time someone stood up to that Harper woman." Marcus nodded, his spirits lifting slightly. The whispers might sting, but knowing he had allies bolstered his resolve. Amara sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop open and her sketchbook resting beside her. She'd spent hours researching James Harper, scrolling through endless articles about his business ventures and philanthropic efforts. The man seemed larger than life, yet he'd chosen to hide her existence. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "I wanted to protect you." But protect her from what? Frustrated, Amara grabbed her phone and typed a text to Claire. "Amara, can we talk more about James? I need answers." Seconds later, her phone buzzed. "Claire, of course. Come downstairs." Amara found her mother in the kitchen, a cup of tea in her hands. Claire looked tired, but her expression softened when she saw Amara. "I've been waiting for you to ask," Claire said, motioning for her to sit. Amara hesitated, then sat across from her. "I want to know everything. No more half-truths. Who was he, really?" Claire sighed deeply. "James was complicated. He loved you, in his own way, but he was a coward. He couldn't face what it meant to have a biracial child in this town, not with his family's reputation on the line." "Did he ever try to see me?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. Claire nodded. "Once. When you were a baby. He held you for maybe 5 minutes before Evelyn came home and saw us. She threw a fit and made it clear he'd lose everything if he acknowledged you." Amara's hands clenched into fists. "So he chose his money and reputation over his own daughter." "I won't defend his choices," Claire said softly. "But I will say this, he wanted better for you. That's why he left us the financial support, even if it had to be secret." Amara stared at the table, her emotions a whirlwind. Finally, she looked up. I'm going to confront Evelyn. She owes me the truth. Claire reached out, placing a hand over Amara's. Be careful, sweetheart. She's dangerous when she feels cornered. Marcus returned to the library later that day, this time combing through the town's legal archives. The will he'd seen earlier still nagged at him, something about it felt incomplete. After hours of searching, he found what he needed, an addendum to the will, dated only days before James's death. It wasn't in the official file but had been logged as a draft. The addendum was brief but telling. To Amara Ellis, my daughter, I leave a trust fund to be administered by her mother, Claire Ellis. This acknowledgement is long overdue. Marcus's heart raced as he read the document. This was it, a tangible connection proving James had intended to claim Amara. But why hadn't the addendum been finalized? He photographed the page and carefully replaced the file. Evelyn's meddling seemed the most likely explanation. Whatever her reasons, Marcus now had the evidence he needed to confront her. Amara stood outside the Harper estate, her nerves frayed but her resolve unshaken. She rang the bell, and the chime echoed ominously. Evelyn opened the door, her expression cold and unwelcoming. What do you want? Amara stepped forward, her voice steady. I want the truth. About James. About me. Evelyn's face tightened, but she didn't deny the claim. I don't know what you think you'll accomplish by coming here. I want to know why you've kept this a secret, Amara demanded. You stole my father from me. You stole his acknowledgement of me. Evelyn crossed her arms. Your father made his choices. He wasn't strong enough to stand up to the expectations placed on him. Blame him, not me. You pushed him into a corner. Amara shot back. You cared more about your image than his happiness, or mine. Evelyn's lips thinned. You have no idea what you're talking about, child. James was weak, and this town would have eaten him alive if he'd brought you into the picture. I saved him from ruin. Amara's voice cracked with emotion. You didn't save him. You destroyed him. And you won't destroy me. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn standing alone on the porch, her mask of composure cracking. Marcus sat across from a lawyer in a modest office downtown. The walls were lined with shelves full of thick legal volumes, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Teresa Cole, leaned forward, her brow furrowed as she examined the documents Marcus had brought. This addendum to James Harper's will, Teresa began, tapping the copy Marcus had photographed, is significant. It proves he intended to acknowledge Amara. But because it's not officially filed, it's going to be tough to use in court. Marcus frowned. Why wasn't it filed? Who benefits from keeping it out of the record? Evelyn Harper, obviously, Teresa replied. If this addendum had gone through, it would have diluted her inheritance. She has every motive to suppress it. Can we do anything? Marcus asked. We can petition the court to reopen James Harper's estate, citing this document as new evidence. But that's a big step. Evelyn will fight it tooth and nail. Marcus nodded slowly. I don't care how hard it gets. Amara deserves the truth. Teresa gave him a small, approving smile. You've got courage, Mr. Bennett. I'll start the paperwork. But be prepared, this is going to get ugly. Evelyn Harper stared out the large window of her estate, her manicured hands trembling around a glass of wine. The town was abuzz with rumors about Marcus's discovery and Amara's confrontation. She could feel her grip on her carefully curated life slipping through her fingers. Her housekeeper, a young woman who had only been working there a few months, entered hesitantly. Mrs. Harper? You've got a visitor. Evelyn turned sharply. Who is it? The housekeeper looked uneasy. It's Claire Ellis. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Send her in. Claire entered the room with the kind of confidence that only came from years of holding back too much. She looked Evelyn directly in the eye. You've got a lot of nerve, Claire, Evelyn began, her voice cold. I've kept quiet for years, Claire interrupted. For my daughter's sake. But now that Amara knows the truth, I'm not staying silent anymore. You think you can come here and threaten me? Evelyn scoffed. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Oh, I know exactly who you are, Claire shot back. A bitter old woman who's so afraid of losing her reputation that she's willing to destroy everything in her path. Well, I'm not afraid of you anymore. Evelyn's mask of control slipped for a moment, her face twisting in anger. If you think this town will believe anything you say, you're delusional. They'll side with me. They always have. Claire took a step closer. This time is different. Marcus has the evidence, and the truth always comes out eventually. You can't stop it, Evelyn. Evelyn didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to the window, clutching her wine glass as if it were the only thing holding her together. Amara sat in her high school art classroom after hours, the room silent except for the scratching of her pencil against the paper. She was working on a portrait, a mix of memory and imagination. It was her father, James Harper, as she envisioned him. The door opened, and Marcus stepped inside, his expression soft. Your mom said I might find you here. Amara looked up and managed a small smile. I needed some time to think. Marcus pulled up a stool beside her, watching as she added shading to James's jawline. You're really talented, he said. Thanks. She set the pencil down, her gaze lingering on the drawing. It's strange, you know? Trying to picture someone I've never really met. I keep wondering, what would he think of me? I think he'd be proud, Marcus said gently. Amara looked at him, her eyes glistening. Do you really believe that? Even after everything? Marcus nodded. He made mistakes, sure. But I don't think he ever stopped caring about you. And you've already shown more strength than most people ever do. That's something to be proud of. Amara wiped her eyes quickly and straightened. I want to help. If you're going to take on Evelyn, I want to be part of it. Are you sure? Marcus asked. It won't be easy. I'm sure, she said firmly. This is my fight too. The town meeting was held in the courthouse, its benches packed with residents whispering amongst themselves. At the front of the room, Marcus stood beside Teresa, clutching the addendum in his hands. Evelyn sat across the aisle, her posture stiff, her gaze icy. Teresa addressed the room. We're here to discuss new evidence regarding James Harper's estate. This document, a drafted addendum to his will, proves his intention to acknowledge Amara Ellis as his daughter and rightful heir. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Marcus stepped forward. I've lived in this town my whole life, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I know how things work here. People like Evelyn Harper hold all the power, and the rest of us are expected to stay in our place. But this isn't about power. It's about truth. James Harper made a choice to try, in his own way, to make things right. And Evelyn took that choice away. She spent years hiding the secret, but it's time for it to come to light. Evelyn stood abruptly. This is slander, she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. You're just a mailman with no understanding of the complexities of my family's affairs. I'm a mailman, Marcus agreed, but I know right from wrong. And keeping this hidden is wrong. The room fell silent, all eyes on Evelyn as she sat down, her composure unraveling. Later that night, Marcus returned home, exhausted but resolute. He unlocked his front door and stepped inside, only to freeze. The smell of smoke hit him instantly. He rushed toward his living room, where flames licked at a pile of papers on the coffee table. Grabbing the fire extinguisher from under the sink, he doused the flames until they sputtered out, leaving behind charred remnants of his notes and copies of the will's addendum. His phone buzzed, and he snatched it from his pocket. A single text message glowed on the screen. Stay out of this, or next time it won't just be paper. Marcus's hands shook as he read the message. Evelyn, or someone working for her, was escalating the fight. The evidence might have been destroyed, but Marcus knew one thing for sure: he wasn't giving up. The Harper estate was eerily quiet as Evelyn paced the living room, her mind racing. The walls, lined with portraits of her family's past, felt more like a gallery of judgment than a sanctuary. She clutched a letter she'd written that morning, the words scrawled in anger and desperation. A knock at the door startled her. She glanced through the window and saw Teresa Cole standing on her porch, legal documents in hand. Behind her stood Marcus and Claire. Evelyn opened the door just wide enough to speak. "What do you want?" "Mrs. Harper," Teresa began, her tone calm but firm, "I'm here to notify you that we've filed a formal petition to reopen James Harper's estate based on new evidence." Evelyn scoffed. "This is ridiculous. That so-called evidence is a draft. It has no legal standing." "That's for the court to decide," Teresa replied evenly. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady but resolute. "Evelyn, you can keep fighting this, but the truth is already out. You can't bury it anymore." Evelyn's composure cracked. "You think you've won? You've turned this town against me, destroyed everything I've worked for." "No," Claire interjected, her voice filled with quiet strength. "You did that yourself, Evelyn. All we did was pull back the curtain." Evelyn's hand tightened around the letter. For a fleeting moment, regret flashed across her face. Then she slammed the door, leaving them on the porch. Inside, she sank into a chair, her shoulders trembling. She knew she was losing. Amara stood on the small stage in the school auditorium, her heart pounding as she addressed a group of classmates and parents. The school had invited her to speak at an event celebrating student achievements, but she had decided to use the platform for something more personal. "Most of you know me as just another student," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But recently, I've learned something about myself that's changed everything. My father was James Harper, a man many of you probably admired. But he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, and so have I. What matters is what we do with those mistakes. For too long, this town has been stuck in the past, afraid to face its truths. But I'm standing here today to say I'm proud of who I am, every part of me." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, growing until it filled the auditorium. In the front row, Marcus and Claire watched with pride, their smiles wide. The post office buzzed with activity the next morning, but the atmosphere was different. As Marcus walked in, his co-workers greeted him with warm smiles and pats on the back. "You're famous now, Bennett," Carl teased, holding up a copy of the town newspaper. The headline read, "Local Mailman Uncovers Harper Family Secret." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "Not exactly the kind of fame I was looking for." As he sorted through the day's mail, the postmaster approached him, his expression uncharacteristically warm. "Marcus, I just wanted to say, you did something brave. This town needs more people like you." "Thanks," Marcus replied, genuinely touched. As he loaded his truck, he glanced at the route list. Evelyn Harper's address was still on it. For a moment, he considered skipping it. But then he shook his head. No matter what had happened, his job was to deliver the mail. Amara and Marcus sat together on the porch of the Ellis home, a warm breeze rustling the trees around them. Claire was inside, preparing dinner, the smell of baked chicken wafting through the open window. "You've come a long way, you know," Marcus said, handing Amara a glass of iced tea. "So have you," she replied with a smile. Marcus chuckled. "I guess we've both had some growing to do." Amara's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if James had told the truth sooner?" "Every day," Marcus admitted. "But we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward. And make sure no one else has to go through what we did," Amara added. "Exactly." They sat in companionable silence, the sun setting behind the trees. The town square was alive with activity as vendors set up booths for the annual Cloverfield Festival. Marcus walked through the crowd, his uniform a familiar sight. He waved to neighbors and exchanged friendly banter with vendors. At one booth, Amara displayed her artwork, paintings that blended the town's history with her own story. People stopped to admire her work, and she beamed with pride. Nearby, Evelyn Harper stood by herself, watching the festivities with a distant expression. Her once commanding presence seemed diminished, her isolation self-imposed. Marcus approached her, his steps measured. "Mrs. Harper." She turned, her face tightening at the sight of him. "What do you want?" "Just wanted to say." "I hope you find peace," Marcus said sincerely. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed like she might respond. But then she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the warm glow of the festival lights. As Marcus continued through the square, he spotted Amara laughing with her friends, her confidence shining brightly. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time in a long while, Cloverfield felt like it was moving toward a better future.